Eleanor Sullivan's screams echoed across the barren Arizona landscape as the carriage carrying her new husband disappeared into the distance. Leaving her alone at the altar, they'd improvised beneath a lone cottonwood tree, her wedding dress torn and her hopes shattered like the promises he'd made. The year was 1885, and Eleanor Sullivan had just become another victim of one of the West's cruelest cons, the mail-order bride scheme that had lured countless desperate women from the East with promises of respectable marriages, only to abandon them in unfamiliar territory after taking their dowries and whatever valuables they'd brought along. She collapsed to her knees, the pristine white of her modest wedding gown now stained with dust and spotted with blood from where she'd been roughly handled, when she tried to prevent her groom from stealing her mother's locket, the only thing of value she'd brought to this God-forsaken territory. The minister who'd performed the ceremony had been in on the scheme, disappearing with her new husband and the two other men who'd posed as witnesses. "Please," she whispered to no one, her voice breaking, "please help me." The sun beat down mercilessly, and Eleanor knew she couldn't stay beneath the tree forever. Miles from the nearest town with no water and no protection, she faced a death sentence if she didn't move. But move where? In which direction? She had no map, no compass, and the vastness of the territory stretched endlessly around her. Hours passed as she walked, following what appeared to be wagon tracks, hoping they would lead to civilization. Her silk slippers, never meant for such terrain, had shredded, forcing her to continue barefoot across the unforgiving ground. The elegant hairstyle she'd arranged so carefully that morning had collapsed, pins lost along the way, leaving her auburn hair to tumble around her shoulders and stick to her tear-streaked face. By late afternoon, when the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Eleanor's strength was failing. Her lips were cracked, her throat so parched she could no longer call for help. When she stumbled over a rock and fell hard to the ground, she lacked the will to rise again. "This is it," she thought, curling into herself as the day's heat began to give way to the desert's notorious nighttime chill. This is how Eleanor Sullivan ends. Yorick Blackwood had been tracking the Simmons gang for 3 days. As the newest deputy in Copper Creek, he'd been given the task nobody wanted following the notorious band of grifters who specialized in fleecing vulnerable women, leaving them stranded in the wilderness while making off with their worldly possessions. He'd almost given up the trail when his horse, a reliable Palomino named Chance, suddenly nickered and changed direction, heading toward a shape on the ground that Yorick might have missed in the fading light. "Whoa, boy," he said, pulling gently on the reins. As he drew closer, he realized the shape was a woman, crumpled in a heap, wearing what appeared to be a wedding dress. "Dear God," he muttered, dismounting quickly and approaching with caution. He'd seen the Simmons gang's handiwork before, but never had they left someone so far from civilization. When he reached her side, he knelt down, noting with relief the slight rise and fall of her chest, alive but barely. "Madam," he said softly, touching her shoulder. "Madam, can you hear me?" Eleanor stirred, her eyes fluttering open to reveal irises the color of a stormy sea. Fear flashed across her face and she tried to push away from him. "No," she rasped. "Please, no more." "I'm not going to hurt you," Yorick said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm Deputy Yorick Blackwood from Copper Creek. I'm here to help." She stared at him, distrust evident in every line of her body. He couldn't blame her, not after what she'd been through. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Yorick knew he needed to get her warm. Without hesitation, he removed his long duster coat and gently wrapped it around her trembling form. "You're safe now," he said, his voice dropping to a gentle rumble that seemed to calm her slightly. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe, get you water and food. Will you let me do that?" Eleanor stared at this tall stranger with the kind eyes. His face, though weathered by sun and wind, was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. But it was the genuine concern in his expression that finally convinced her to nod. "What's your name?" he asked, helping her to her feet, supporting her when she swayed. Eleanor Sullivan, she whispered, then corrected herself. Ellie, everyone calls me Ellie. Yorick shook his head. No, madam, Eleanor suits you better. Strong name for a strong woman who survived out here on her own. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm secure around her waist as he turned Chance toward Copper Creek. What about my husband? She asked, her voice barely audible as exhaustion claimed her. Yorick's jaw tightened. That wasn't your husband, madam. That was Simmons. Him and his gang have been running this con across 3 territories. But don't you worry about that now, just rest. I've got you. As she leaned back against his solid chest, Eleanor felt something she hadn't expected to feel again after the day's betrayal. Safe. Thank you, she murmured, before darkness claimed her consciousness. Yorick felt her go limp against him and tightened his hold. I've got you, he repeated, though she couldn't hear him. And I'm going to make this right. By the time they reached Copper Creek, night had fully descended. Eleanor had drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey, accepting sips of water from Yorick's canteen when he offered them. Her feet were bloody, her skin sunburned, and a bruise was forming on her cheekbone where she'd apparently been struck. He took her directly to Doc Miller's house at the edge of town, knowing the physician and his wife would provide the care she needed without subjecting her to the prying eyes of the town's more curious inhabitants. Martha Miller, the doctor's wife, took one look at the bedraggled woman in the wedding dress and sprang into action, ushering them inside with a stream of sympathetic clucking sounds. Another one of Simmons' victims, she asked Yorick as she helped Eleanor into a chair. He nodded grimly. Found her about 15 miles out near Blackwater Creek. The monsters, Martha muttered, left her to die out there. She turned her attention to Eleanor. You're safe now, dear. We'll get you cleaned up, some food in you, and a proper bed to sleep in. Eleanor looked up at the kind-faced woman, tears filling her eyes. I can't pay you. He took everything. Nonsense, Martha said firmly. We don't need payment. This town takes care of its own, and as far as I'm concerned, you're one of us now. Yorick watched as Martha and her husband tended to Eleanor's injuries. The young woman was stronger than she looked, barely flinching as the doctor cleaned and bandaged her feet, or when Martha applied salve to her sunburned skin. I'll return tomorrow to check on her, Yorick said as he prepared to leave, and I'll need her statement when she's well enough. Eleanor caught his eye from where she sat, wrapped in a clean blanket, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Your coat, she said. I still have your coat. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Keep it for now. It suits you. As the door closed behind him, Martha raised an eyebrow at Eleanor. That's the most I've heard Deputy Blackwood say at one time since he came to town 6 months ago. Eleanor blushed, though it was hardly noticeable beneath her sunburn. He saved my life. Yes, Martha said thoughtfully. And from the look in his eyes, I'd say he's planning to do a lot more than that. For the next week, Eleanor recuperated in the Millers' spare room. Word of her ordeal had spread through the small community, and while she initially feared judgment or scorn, she instead found herself the recipient of the town's generosity. Women brought dresses that might fit her slender frame, while others contributed small necessities: a hairbrush, a shawl, even a pair of sturdy boots that would serve her better than the fancy slippers she'd worn from Boston. Yorick visited daily, ostensibly to gather information for his investigation, but increasingly lingering to talk. Eleanor found herself looking forward to his visits, to the quiet strength he projected, and the careful way he listened to her. On her 8th day in Copper Creek, as she sat on the Miller's porch enjoying the afternoon sunshine, Yorick arrived with news. We caught them, he said without preamble, settling into the chair beside her. Simmons and his gang. They tried their scheme in Tucson, but the marshal there had received my telegraph. They're in custody now. Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. And my mother's locket? Yorick reached into his vest pocket and withdrew the silver pendant. Found it among their things. She took it with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes as she opened it to reveal the tiny portrait of her parents on their wedding day. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than I can say." "There's something else," Yorick said, his usually confident voice uncertain. "Sheriff Johnson and I discussed your situation. Since you were brought here under false pretenses, the town council has agreed to provide you with funds for a ticket back east, if that's what you want." Eleanor looked out at the bustling main street of Copper Creek. In just over a week, she'd come to know many of its inhabitants, Martha and her husband, of course, but also Mrs. Abernathy, who ran the general store, and old Mr. Fletcher, who'd insisted on gifting her a handmade leather satchel to replace the one those scoundrels took. "What if I don't want to go back?" she asked quietly. Yorick's eyes widened slightly. "You'd stay after everything that happened? What's waiting for me in Boston?" "A cousin who barely tolerates my presence, work as a seamstress in a shop where the owner made it clear his interest in me wasn't purely professional." She shook her head. "Here at least I've found kindness." "Martha mentioned you're skilled with a needle and thread," Yorick said. "This town could use a good seamstress. The nearest one is in Tucson." Eleanor smiled. "Are you offering me a job, Deputy Blackwood?" "I'm suggesting a possibility," he corrected, his cheeks reddening slightly beneath his tan. "This territory needs strong women, not just men with guns. People who can build something lasting." As she considered his words, Eleanor realized that despite the terrible circumstances of her arrival, perhaps fate had led her exactly where she needed to be. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like to try staying, at least for a while." The smile that spread across Yorick's face made her heart skip a beat, though she tried not to examine that reaction too closely. It was far too soon for such feelings, especially after her recent betrayal. "Welcome to Copper Creek, Miss Sullivan," he said, extending his hand. She took it, feeling the calluses on his palm against her smoother skin. "Thank you, Deputy Blackwood." Neither of them mentioned how their hands remained clasped a moment longer than strictly necessary. Within a month, Eleanor had established herself in Copper Creek. With the town council's assistance, she rented a small space next to the general store, setting up shop as the town's dressmaker and seamstress. Her skills quickly earned her a reputation, and soon women were traveling from neighboring settlements to commission her work. She took a room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a respectable establishment that housed the town's schoolteacher and the young woman who worked at the telegraph office. In the evenings, she often found herself on the porch with the other residents, listening to stories about the territory and slowly sharing pieces of her own past. Yorick remained a constant presence in her life, stopping by her shop on his daily rounds, occasionally bringing her small gifts, a ribbon he thought would complement her auburn hair, a particularly beautiful piece of fabric he'd spotted in a merchant's wagon passing through town. "You don't need to keep checking on me," she told him one afternoon as he leaned against the doorframe of her shop watching her work. "I'm quite settled now." "Maybe I just enjoy the view," he replied, then immediately looked mortified at his own boldness. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm as she ducked her head to hide her pleased smile. "Deputy Blackwood, are you flirting with me?" "Would it be unwelcome if I was?" he asked, his usual confidence faltering. She considered the question seriously. 3 months had passed since the disastrous fake wedding that had brought her to Copper Creek. The bruises had long since faded, and while the memories remained, they no longer haunted her daily thoughts. "No," she finally said. "It wouldn't be unwelcome at all." Their courtship progressed slowly, respectfully. Yorick escorted her to church on Sundays, joined her for dinner at the boarding house twice a week, and walked with her in the evenings when her work was done. They talked about everything: his childhood on a farm in Missouri, her life in Boston after losing her parents to influenza, their dreams and fears. "I never thought I'd want to marry," she confessed one evening as they sat on a bench outside the church, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors. "Even before what happened with Simmons, Marriage always seemed like the end of independence for a woman. Yorick was quiet for a long moment. My parents had a different kind of marriage, he finally said. My father used to say that my mother was the strongest person he knew and that he was lucky she chose to share her strength with him. He believed marriage should be a partnership, not ownership. Eleanor studied his profile in the fading light. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Yorick agreed. He taught me that a real man respects women, treats them as equals. That's why I became a lawman, to protect those who can't protect themselves, to stand against men like Simmons who prey on others. Without thinking, Eleanor reached out and took his hand. The world needs more men like you and your father. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Eleanor, I know it's only been a few months and I understand if you need more time, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. I care for you deeply. Her heart raced at his declaration. I care for you too, Yorick. You do. He looked so surprised that she couldn't help but laugh. Of course I do. Did you think I let every deputy in town escort me on walks and bring me ribbons? His smile was slow and sweet. I hoped not. As winter approached, their relationship deepened. Eleanor found herself sharing things with Yorick she'd never told another soul: her fears, her ambitions, her most private thoughts. In return, he opened up about the death of his parents in a flash flood 5 years earlier and his subsequent journey westward seeking purpose. The town watched their courtship with approving eyes. Martha Miller told Eleanor over tea that she'd never seen the deputy so happy, while Sheriff Johnson commented to Yorick that he'd finally found a woman who matches you for stubbornness. On Christmas Eve, Yorick invited Eleanor to join him for a special dinner at the town's only restaurant. She wore her finest dress, a deep green creation she'd made herself, and pinned her hair in an elegant style that showcased the pearl earrings he'd given her for her birthday in November. When she entered the restaurant, she found it empty except for Yorick, who stood nervously by a table decorated with candles and evergreen boughs. "Where is everyone?" she asked, looking around the normally bustling establishment. "I asked Mr. Pearson if we could have the place to ourselves tonight," Yorick explained, pulling out her chair. "I wanted privacy for what I have to say." Eleanor's pulse quickened as she sat down. Yorick remained standing, his expression a mixture of hope and anxiety that she found endearing on such a normally composed man. "Eleanor Sullivan," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "When I found you that day, bruised and abandoned, I had no idea you would become the most important person in my life. You came here as a victim, but you've proven yourself to be the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I know your first experience with marriage was a cruel deception, and I would understand if you never wanted to risk such a commitment again. But I love you, Eleanor. I love your courage, your kindness, your fierce independence. I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife, not because you need my protection, but because I believe we belong together." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she looked down at this man who had rescued her not just from death in the desert, but from a life without real love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Yorick Blackwood, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, not onto the finger that had briefly worn the fake wedding ring from Simmons, but onto her right hand. "A new beginning," he explained. "When we marry, I'll place a proper wedding band on your left hand, but this is my promise to you, made without deception or falsehood." She touched the ring with wonder. "It's perfect." They were married on a bright spring day in 1886 with the entire town in attendance. Eleanor wore a dress of ivory silk she'd worked on secretly for months, embroidered with tiny wildflowers like those that bloomed across the desert after rain. Yorick stood tall and proud in a new suit, his badge polished to a high shine on his chest. Sheriff Johnson performed the ceremony, his gruff voice softening as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Yorick kissed her, Eleanor felt the last shadows of her past finally fade away. replaced by the warm certainty of a future built on trust and genuine love. The town threw them a celebration unlike anything Copper Creek had seen before. Tables groaned with food contributed by every household, musicians played well into the night, and the newlyweds danced beneath stars that seemed to shine especially bright for them. As evening fell, Yorick wrapped his coat around Eleanor's shoulders to ward off the spring chill, the same coat he'd wrapped around her that first day, now cleaned and mended by her own hand. "You know," she said, leaning into his embrace, "this coat has become something of a symbol for us." "How so?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The first time you put it around me, I was broken and lost. You called me madam and promised to keep me safe." She turned in his arms to face him. "Now I'm wearing it as your wife, no longer lost, but exactly where I belong." Yorick's eyes shone with emotion as he tightened his arms around her. "I knew even then," he admitted. "Something in me recognized you as someone special, someone I needed to protect not just because it was my duty, but because my heart demanded it." "Is that why you visited me every day during my recovery? Professional concern," she teased. He laughed, the sound warming her more than any coat could. "Sheriff Johnson actually suggested I was neglecting my other duties. Said I was spending more time checking on that poor bride than patrolling for outlaws. And what did you tell him? That some things are more important than chasing bandits." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't have the courage to admit I was falling in love with you then, but I think he knew." As the celebration continued around them, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. Had she not answered that advertisement for a mail-order bride, had she not been desperate enough to travel alone across the country to marry a stranger, she would never have found herself abandoned in the Arizona desert. And had that terrible event not occurred, she would never have met Yorick. "What are you thinking about with such a serious expression?" her husband asked, concern touching his features. "How sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied. "If I hadn't been left for dead by a con man, I would never have found genuine love." Yorick nodded slowly. "I've thought the same, though I wish you hadn't had to suffer to find your way to me." "The suffering faded," she assured him. "The happiness remains." As the years passed, Eleanor and Yorick built a life together that exceeded all expectations. Her dressmaking business flourished, eventually expanding to include a small shop in Tucson, managed by a young woman she'd trained. Yorick was promoted to sheriff when Johnson retired, his fair-minded approach to law enforcement earning him respect throughout the territory. They built a modest home on the outskirts of town, with a large porch where they spent summer evenings watching the sunset. Eleanor planted a garden that became the envy of Copper Creek, somehow coaxing flowers and vegetables to grow in the challenging desert soil. Their family grew with the birth of their daughter, Sarah, in 1887, followed by twin boys, Thomas and James, in 1889. The children thrived in the freedom of the frontier, growing strong and independent under their parents' loving guidance. Eleanor never forgot where she came from or how she'd arrived in Copper Creek. Each year on the anniversary of her rescue, she and Yorick would ride to the spot where he'd found her and place wildflowers beneath the lone cottonwood tree. It was their private ritual, a way of honoring the painful beginning that had led to their happiness. "Do you ever regret it?" Yorick asked her on one such anniversary as they sat beneath the tree, now 10 years married with 3 healthy children waiting at home with Martha Miller. "Regret what?" Eleanor asked, leaning against his shoulder, coming west, answering that advertisement, "All the pain you endured." She considered the question seriously, as she always did when her husband sought her honest thoughts. "No," she finally said. "I regret that men like Simmons exist, who prey on vulnerable women. I regret that I was naive enough to believe his lies, but I cannot regret the path that led me to you, to our children, to the life we've built." Yorick wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You know, in all these years, I've never told you something." "What's that?" The day I found you, I'd actually given up the search. I was heading back to town, convinced I'd lost Simmons' trail, if Chance hadn't changed direction on his own, if he hadn't sensed you somehow. He couldn't finish the thought. Eleanor reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that 10 years of sun and smiles had etched there. But he did. You found me, and you wrapped me in your coat and brought me home. Called you madam, he added with a smile. Too afraid to use your name. And now, he turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the same love they had shown on their wedding day. Now, Eleanor Blackwood, I call you my wife, my heart, my home. She kissed him then, beneath the tree that had witnessed both the worst and the beginning of the best moments of her life. The bruised bride abandoned in the dust had found not just rescue but redemption in the arms of a man who saw her strength even when she was at her weakest. As they rode back to Copper Creek, to the life and family they had created together, Eleanor felt a profound gratitude for the twisted path that had led her here. The setting sun bathed the desert in golden light, transforming the harsh landscape into something beautiful much as love had transformed her life from desperation to joy. Yorick reached across to take her hand as they rode side by side, a gesture he'd made countless times over the years, yet one that still filled her with warmth. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, squeezing his hand. "With you, I'm always home."